Good afternoon. We're going to wait another minute or two while people trickle into the event. So please be patient and we'll get started momentarily. Thanks. Okay, when we get started, but before we start off with the content, we'll do a little icebreaker. So, hey Richard, what do you call a bear with no teeth?
I don't know. What do you call a bear with no teeth?
A gummy bear.
I like that.
Okay, yeah, great. So, continue on with our tradition, right? So, so we got a great content today. So the basics of compliance. So why the little things matter. So we're going to have Steve Thomas and Richard Beserra, our compliance technical specialists, kind of talk through that content today. And of course, as always, if you have questions, you please feel free to enter them in the Q&A window. And with that being said, I'll hand it over to Richard and Steve. Thanks.
Hey, thanks, Tony. All right. So thanks for joining us here. Welcome to our presentation. Today is going to be less of a focus on technical solutions and more of a sort of 10,000-foot view of how to implement some controls and what to consider right from the start. As you can see, the basics of compliance. I feel like sometimes we hyper focus on the technological solutions and we kind of miss the forest for the trees. So today, step back and we're going to look at the forest. So I like technology, everybody does, and it's only getting more advanced every day. Technology is really cool. I use it all the time. But technology has a limit. It can only do what we tell it to do. Technology can't replace humans. It can't replace good decision making. And if the good decisions, the habits, the basics, as we described, aren't there, the technology can only do so much to make up for it. And oftentimes it can't do enough. So before you implement anything like a CrowdStrike, Sentinel, Defender, you got to make sure your basics are good to go right off the bat. And so what are some of these good habits? These are the ones that I want to cover in our presentation today. The only one that's going to have specific technical guidance is multi-factor authentication. And I'm going to talk about why when we get there. But that's right at the top of the list. It's going to be the first thing I talk about for a reason. So why don't we look at what that reason is? Every year, we see reports coming from any number of cybersecurity companies. Verizon and IBM produce their own. Mandiant does, Gartner, Microsoft, and all of these reports tell us the same thing. That initial access, whenever a breach happens, is what allows it to start in the vast majority of cases. People get in through compromised credentials, and that's what they need to start their lateral movement. You want to get into somebody's network and find out what they've got. that's the best way to do it. And a lot of times, this can result in access that even the company didn't realize they still have, or the agency. I actually worked with a employer during the pandemic, very briefly, that gave all of its employees access to their Google Drives that the manager had. And I left that company shortly afterwards, within a couple of days. And so imagine my surprise when a year later, I logged into that same email, which I never checked. I just wanted to see what was in it, and found out they still had that shared network drive with all of that Google information, a bunch of customer accounts, a bunch of addresses, PII and PHI. I did the ethical thing. I disconnected it and told them, hey, you need to do something about this. But that is the kind of access that a compromised identity can result in, that unintentional access. If I didn't have MFA turned on for that account and it got compromised at some point during that pandemic, somebody else could have gone in, pulled all that customer info, sold it on the dark web somewhere. So what we're seeing here on the right is a little screenshot I took from the latest version of the Microsoft Digital Defense Report. In 88% of the incidents that Microsoft investigated, that our tools were involved in, the successful network breaches were because MFA was not turned on. Simple as that. And so MFA by itself, just turning it on, shuts out a huge majority of the potential attacks. And it's not just good practice. It's not just, this is a great suggestion, we'll get to it when we have time. It is a requirement for any number of legal compliance regulations. I have a few of them listed on screen here, but everything from COPA to GDPR, international regulations, state laws, local laws, they all mention it somewhere. If you're putting it in a computer, it likely says protect it with MFA. Now, the regulations on screen and several others, they draw their requirements, the specific technological ones, from NIST 800. And guess what? Windows Hello and Azure MFA meet those requirements right out of the box. This means you don't need a compliance team to go dig through a bunch of dry documentation. They don't have to perform some kind of security review before they can decide to use Windows Hello, which is a passwordless solution. You can use this right away, meet your compliance regulations, and improve your security posture, all at the same time. So once we get past MFA, what next? Well, this is where you have to start taking your employees into account. So your agency employees, these are the guys that are going to work with your data day in and day out. They're taking phone calls, they work with your emails, they're editing your documents, they know your organizational structure. Your frontline workers are going to be your first line of defense. And that's because they're going to be the first people targeted in any kind of cyber attack, any kind of social engineering phishing campaign. It's going to go after them first. So they have to know how to use your tools for compliance. They have to be familiar with them, and they need to have access to guidance quickly and simply. So if you're considering a new solution for your compliance, something like data loss prevention or turning on MFA, try to take some of these considerations in mind. So be involved with your plan and talk about these things with your SOC team. So your workers, what kind of guidance can they get on their own? People like to be independent. Frontline workers especially enjoy being able to solve problems or get answers on their own. All they need is access to the information. So is there an FAQ somewhere? Is there an email on your SOC team that they can reference or that they can contact? If they have questions about whether or not this document can be shared with a reporter outside the company, who can they ask that to? Or where can they look it up? And then if something unexpected happens, can they get answers quickly? Can they contact somebody who's supposed to know? And if they're non-technical, if they're working with mobile devices, can they set things up pretty simplistically? If they if you have mobile device users, a lot of times they're not usually as technical as somebody who's working in the weeds of a computer system all day or in the weeds of a compliance and a security system. So think about that. Can the guidance they access be simple? Can it be tailored specifically to their mobile devices, to their OS on that mobile device? Something that they can follow step by step, not just for how to set something up like an application, but for how to use it in their day-to-day business. And this goes more than just informing your frontline workers. Can your IT team handle this? Do you have somebody designated in your SOC team that their job is now learn about this new solution you're going to roll out so they can answer questions quickly and they don't have to go looking up documentation when the situation arises? So these are kind of the things to think about, because when you roll things out, you want your employees to be able to get answers quickly, and you want them to be able to get it in an easily understood manner. And if they can do it without needing to go through your IT or your SOC or your desktop support teams, more is the better. And so our sensitivity labels have an excellent solution for this, and it's just one example. You can type in a tooltip, a simple policy tip into the sensitivity labels, and all of your employees can mouse over it right there in their application, whether it's Word or Outlook or Excel, and they can see whatever text you want them to. So if it says this label puts this encryption on your document and prevents you from sending it externally, well, great. Now they know what to use that for. They don't have to ask somebody. They don't have to try to send it and find out what happens. You can even put a link in that same menu, and they can click it and it'll go to an FAQ. It can go to an internally hosted document on a SharePoint site, or it can go to some external documentation. The point is, right there in the application, it's one, maybe two clicks of a button, and the employees can see what they need to know to use these tools, and they don't have to wait for a response from another team somewhere else. The info is right there, and it can be as simple as you need it to be. Now, leaping directly from that, the guidance has to match reality. So, whatever you're going to type in to your guidance, try to remember it's gotta work, pure and simple. If it doesn't work, if it's not tested, if the guidance doesn't match the reality, employees don't have time to sit there and fix it. They have to pull it and use something else. So if Teams Live isn't letting people join, or if the encryption on a document can't be opened by a customer on the other side of the planet, no one's going to take the time to figure it out. They just don't have it. They'll pull that encryption. They'll go use Zoom or Slack or something that works that may not be under the security controls you have. Best way to solve that problem in advance is to make sure the solution works. And so how do you do that? Test it. You have to get that guidance tested first. And this is where you're going to want to involve your desktop support stakeholders, because they're going to understand the needs of the employees in an agency or in an organization. They're going to know what kinds of logical leaps people make in your environment, what kinds of misunderstandings in documentation can be made. If there's going to be confusion, for example, over a common acronym that conflicts with the same acronym used for some in-house built application, they're the ones that can tell you that. The reason it's important to have all of this correct, to make sure it works, is because employees have to be able to trust that what it says on the box is exactly what it's going to do when they click the button. It has to do what it says on the tin. Again, this is a matter of security, because employees don't have time to figure out what they're doing wrong, or what they themselves are misunderstanding, or what they missed somewhere in a menu 2 or 3 button clicks back. So, pilot program, when you're rolling out a new compliance solution, work out the documentation and make sure it's going to be understood. Test it yourself. Assume you know nothing about this and all you have is the steps in front of you and go through them. Ask your SOC teams to try the same and find out, hey, this isn't going to work. This is confusing. This misses a step, all before you send it out to your employees. Now, going from there, you have to know what you know before you can even begin crafting the guidance for a new solution, before you can start working out the documentation for it, before you can start figuring out, hey, what do I want to communicate with people? Know what you know beyond just your data and your environment. So consider this. If the IRS or the FBI came around for an audit and they started asking some of the questions you see on screen, could you, as someone like a CTO or a CISO, answer these? Do you know if your SOC team could answer these? If you're a member of the SOC team, do you know where you can get this information quickly? This is the sort of thing to understand about your environment. Could my SOC team tell me how many emails and where they're at that contain sensitive info? And this is just a list. This is just a short example. This isn't a comprehensive list, but it's the kind of knowledge and visibility you want to strive for in your environment, more than just pulling up the technical list of documents that have things like that. Do you know how your environment is supposed to operate? And the reason this is important is because what we see on the left here called dwell time. So dwell time, as you can see, is how long an attacker can live in your network before you might know it. And the number for that is trending down all the way from 2013 when it was around 6 months down to now when it's gone to about 16 days as of last year. But that's still 16 days. And that number is trending down because of tools like we see on the right-hand side, because all of this visibility tells you how your environment is supposed to operate, how your employees normally work with data, and how that data normally moves around versus how it is moving around. So
Hey,
if,
Richard.
yeah, go
Hey,
ahead.
Richard. Yeah, hey, apologies for the interruption. I think we're having a quick technical thing we just need to sort through right now. Apologies to the audience. Richard, is it possible for you to unshare and reshare your screen, please?
Absolutely. Give me 1 second.
Thank you so much.
And let me get it reshared for you here.
Thank you. And thanks everybody on the call for your patience.
All right. How does that look?
All right. I believe that we are back. I'm showing that we're back. So
Not a problem.
Thank you so much. Sorry for the interruption.
No problem. So was everybody kind of looking at the previous slide while I was talking about dwell time?
We may want to jump back to it, Richard, just the previous slide and then jump back into this one.
No problem. So this was just an example of some of the questions that I was describing for a SOC team or for a CISO and a CTO to answer. So the CISO should be asking questions like these of either compliance or security, not as a gotcha, not trying to trap them and figure out who's not doing their job. You want to collaborate with them to plug these holes, to make sure these answers are already there before an incident occurs. And if you're a member of the SOC team or the compliance team, these are the kinds of details you want to strive to have and develop in advance, even if nobody ever asks you for them. So if something happens on a weekend at midnight and you have a night shift employee who discovers it, do they have a phone number they can call? Do they have a plan in a binder somewhere they can whip out and look through? If the IRS asks you for some detailed info, do you have a way to pull it up? Can you look at the permissions that admins or ex-admins hold and find out if there was an account compromise, how broad is their access? You know, you're obviously going to want to know about it. And with something like Sentinel, you'll know about it pretty quickly, but you're still going to want to have an understanding of how far can an attacker reach if such an account were compromised. So think about questions like these when you're going about how to fill out your plan, more than just How do we put in Sentinel? How do we stand up Defender? Think about how do I fit those tools into an overall security posture? And this is why those tools matter. So I mentioned dwell time a few minutes ago, and it is because understanding your environment, not just knowing how people are going to respond to it, but understanding how that content in your environment moves around means you can identify surreptitious behavior that maybe an attacker is trying to get away with. Because obviously we're long past the days where somebody's going to invade your computer and flood it with pop-ups letting you know you've been infected by a virus. Nobody's doing that anymore. They're moving around slowly in your environment. They're trying to expand access. The lateral movement is going to take place in small steps as under the radar as possible. And so understanding that Sally from HR doesn't normally request access to engineering schematics in a designated SharePoint library, or understanding that your frontline workers don't normally email your CTO asking for a FedEx shipping label, understanding that your data is not supposed to leave the environment, and so why is somebody trying 20 times to send it out? Those can tell you there might be a problem here. And that allows you to cut that dwell time down from 21 days to 16 days to possibly even lower through these tools. And there's a link at the end of this slide, well, several links, that go to the how to get started with all these tools that you see on the right. And this is not a comprehensive list, but these are some of the tools that we make available to make this visibility as easy as possible. So by all means, use these, stand them up, learn what you can about them, and start with understanding your environment before you start understanding the technology to put in place. And finally, excuse me, that takes us to the final good habit that I want to mention. All of this stuff, like I said, are basics. This is the kind of thing that you could go watch a YouTube video on and you could figure out very quickly. It clicks when you hear it, but you know, no kidding. That can describe a lot of things. And when you have to deal with 100 different demands for attention all throughout the day, something has to get shoved to the back burner. We just don't have the mental bandwidth to constantly focus on every need every day. So something like a simple email reminder can help bridge that gap quite a lot. Something that just says, hey, did you know attackers can also attempt to phish you by text message, which is still something a lot of people are, learning for the first time. Did you know attackers no longer put a bunch of spelling mistakes and graphical errors in their phishing emails? Or, hey, don't forget, check the sensitivity label on a document before you try to send it out of your environment. Small considerations that spark larger thoughts. And if you are a member of your SOC team or your C-level, practice these habits yourself. Lead from the top, lead by example. If you expect your frontline workers, your employees, who are your vanguard, your first line of defense, to not only have the tools they need, but to know how to use them and to believe in using them, it's got to start from the top. It's got to be a matter of culture, not just technology, because the human element is still the best way for con artists to get in. It's the best way for data to be lost. Just simple people making mistakes, people being led into traps by criminals. Understanding that and strengthening it has more impact on your security than any number of technological products you could purchase. So however good the tech is, whether it's Sentinel, Defender, CrowdStrike, McAfee, Symantec, whatever your technological solution is, it all has to flow from the same good habits that all have to be built at the start and have to be led from the top. Now, these are some of the resources here for all of the tools that I discussed in this presentation. Setting them up is surprisingly easy, and that is going to be the second half of our presentation today. I believe Steve Thomas has a demo ready to go through at least some of these and show you where you can set them up at in Purview and how easy enabling them and using some of their features are. Steve, are you ready over there to take over?
Absolutely.
All right, then with that, I am going to turn this over to Steve so you don't have to listen to me talk and you can see what it's like to have this stuff in practice.
So, first of all, to get in front of any technical difficulties, can everyone see my screen?
Yep, looking good.
Awesome. Yep. So compliance means many different things to different personas within an organization. And when it comes to the basics, there's pretty much established agreement, because the basics of compliance, whether you're talking about compliance in the context of audits, governance, security, or even configuration control, compliance basics are pretty much universal. I mean, it is, at the end of the day, we want to avoid breaches, we want to avoid fines, and most importantly, we don't want our names in the news for any kind of negative reasons. So, we're all pretty much under the agreement that at the end of the day, we're just trying to have a good, solid protection of what I refer to as the last mile for zero trust, data protection. And all the things that we put in place at the end of the day is to protect our data and prevent our data from going to places it should not be going, to prevent our data from being viewed by folks who should not be viewing it. And the most important thing to understand about compliance is an ongoing process, because the adversaries out there are always trying to one-up the game, and it continuously will. So security and compliance in terms of operations management, well, I'm from Texas, so I use the analogy, compliance is like construction in Texas. It's an ongoing process, a never-ending process. And again, I want to also point out that compliance, a holistic compliance posture, is not just about Purview, it's holistic across Microsoft 365 and your estate. Purview is where you can centralize the operations management of your compliance, but there are aspects within Microsoft 365 that will require activity by compliance stakeholders, more so than direct compliance officers. And, Richard dived into it very much immediately in the area of identity. Identity, of course, is the primary security plane when it comes to the philosophy of zero trust. And so one of the first recommendations when it comes to the basics of compliance is to enable MFA. And MFA in Microsoft 365 centers around primarily Azure AD, Azure Active Directory. And of course, we can do this on a per user basis, or we can adopt it more holistically by pretty much making it part of your security default. You can also take it a step further and enforce MFA through conditional access. In this particular example here, I've enforced MFA for all my admins from day one. I'm in the process of doing another thing that Richard recommended, which was testing multi-factor authentication for all users, or the testing of the requirement of multi-factor authentication for all users. And the great thing about conditional access policies is you can set these to report only, so you can get an idea of the potential impact before you actually roll this policy out. Because when it comes to training users to do the right thing, we have what I refer to as the NEAM stage, N-E-A-M. We kind of start with nudging. Then we move into encouraging, and then we sometimes get to the point where we annoy them with daily emails. And then finally we mandate. A good example is something we do here within Microsoft. When a device goes out of compliance, we get a little message saying your device is out of compliance, and then we start increasing the frequency of the notification to the point where we're annoying them. And then finally, after a certain grace period at Microsoft at 72 hours, we simply block access because of non-compliance. And that is probably the first thing I would recommend. But also, I want to point out here that in some cases, just turning on multi-factor authentication may not be enough, because as Richard alluded to earlier, threat actors have upped the game, and we're seeing more and more reports of breaches of MFA due to using SMS or voice text, using SMS or voice calls. And so now you'll see within Microsoft 365, if you've enabled MFA for your users and your users are currently using SMS or voice call as their second factor of authentication, we're recommending now that you move off of SMS and voice call and move into something a little more secure like Microsoft Authenticator, which is a lot more difficult to breach than SMS and voice calls as a second factor of authentication. Now, another thing Richard mentioned was staying on top of, as much as possible, the threat landscape. And we understand that the majority of our customers, especially our customers working in state and local government agencies, don't have the time and are not, expert threat are not threat experts, are not advanced security professionals. And so staying on top of and researching threats is very time consuming, and often our security professionals in state and local governments do not have that bandwidth. But that's fine, because within Microsoft 365 Defender, we have our own ever-evolving threat intelligence mechanism that is constantly being updated on a daily basis, in some cases even hourly basis, as the threat landscape constantly changes and evolves. And a good example of, you might have read in the news this week that a couple of agencies were breached with the royal ransomware. And if I hear of that and I want to understand my potential posture against that, I can go into threat analytics and just do a basic search on, I just put in royal ransomware. I'm searching here. And we see Dev 846 offers royal successor to Conti ransomware. I can click on it and I can get all the intelligence. I can get any impacted assets in my organization, any active incidents, recommended actions, potential vulnerable devices. Fortunately for me, I don't have this. Obviously, I don't have this threat, and I don't have any tracked vulnerabilities that would make myself vulnerable to this threat. But the good news is, if I did, I would be able to, and I would be able to immediately act and try to get in front of this as quickly as possible. Now, again, the basics of compliance is a holistic Microsoft 365 approach, right down to even ensuring that your endpoints are relatively secure as well, because compliance and data protection without good and solid endpoint protection is tempting fate. And so it's important to have a good solution for endpoint threat protection, as well as a good solution for endpoint management, particularly compliance management. Because ensuring that users who are going to be accessing your corporate information or secured information that's protected, you want to make sure that the endpoints are protected as well. And if the endpoints are not protected, then you can mark those devices as non-compliant, and they will no longer have access to corporate resources or essentially be able to even authenticate as well. And there's a variety of options you can do this. You can do this through compliance policies. You can do this through conditional access, or you can do it through a combination. And the great thing about compliance policies is compliance policies allow us to extend this protection into the mobile device landscape. We have so many mechanisms in place to protect the desktop endpoint. But what about the mobile endpoint like Android and iOS? And you can set compliance policies to ensure that these particular endpoints, especially your mobile endpoints, are going to actually have whatever level of security that you would require. And of course, obviously, you would want things like device encryption to be turned on. You would want things like ensuring that there's a passcode enabled on the device as well. You would want to block jailbroken devices. You'd want to ensure that a device is at or under a certain device threat level as well. If you are a Microsoft 365 shop, you want to ensure that all devices, mobile devices that actually have access to your corporate network have Defender for Endpoint, and Defender for Endpoint risk score is at a certain level. I mean, all of this can be done on both the iOS and the Android platform. And at the end of the day, especially when it comes to folks who want to access potentially devices or access information within your corporate estate with their personal devices, they get to choose. They get to choose. If their device is not secure enough, they're going to be told what remediation actions they'll need to do in order to be compliant and access this information. If they choose not to do that, then, well, that's their choice, and they will not be able to access this information on their personal device. So that's kind of the reciprocal agreement that we make when it comes to BYOD or personal devices accessing information. And if you do not have Intune, you can still leverage conditional access and another MDM provider as the compliance vector as well. Because even if you simply just set basic access through conditional access, you are doing so much to achieve the basics of compliance there as well. Now, taking this a step further in your estate, when it comes to securing the endpoint, a lot of folks want to be able to leverage easy buttons, for a lack of a better term, or templates. And I'm a big fan of Microsoft 365's easy buttons, and you'll find Microsoft 365 easy buttons all over the place. And we're going to go through a few of them because these easy buttons help you maintain the basic minimum, or what we refer to as the security and compliance basics of shoring up your overall posture. And for a lot of folks, when they're setting up Windows 10 and Windows 11, devices, security is constantly changing, configuration options are changing, and now with Windows 11 and Windows 11 releasing new features, we used to release them every 6 to 12 months. Now you'll see them popping up like every 3 to 4 months. How do I get in front of all of these potential options that could, every time you have an additional knob, every time you have an additional feature, that is one additional component of code that has the potential to be exploited. So how should I be keeping my machines secured or locked down? And one option is to take advantage under, and I'm showing this in Microsoft Intune, but these baselines can also be implemented through group policy or through the security compliance toolkit. But I always recommend, if you are short-staffed, if you don't have the bandwidth to go in a room for 2 or 3 days and go through every single configuration or policy that exists, and just want to throw some easy buttons down with a good, solid, secure baseline, take advantage of security baselines. And these are not just for the endpoint Windows OS. We have them for Defender for Endpoint. We have them for Microsoft Edge. We have them for Windows 365 and Intune. And these are just the ones that you see in Intune. There are additional ones for like Office as well that are available with the security and compliance toolkit as well. All right. So again, just to rehash, compliance and data protection without good and solid endpoint protection is tempting fate. Now, likewise, the other side of that is compliance and data protection at the end of the day is the last mile for zero trust. And in a zero trust mentality, we assume breach. So we want to dive in on the blast radius, minimizing and reducing the blast radius of breach. And there's ultimately going to be 2 approaches to that when it comes to data security. And when I meet with customers and we talk about data security, moving into the Microsoft Purview space, let me log back in here again. One of the first questions I ask is, do you trust humans to do the right thing? Because if you do trust humans to do the right thing, there's so many things that are out of the box that can be leveraged just within Office and Microsoft 365. But one of the biggest strengths around Purview and a lot of the easy buttons that come within Microsoft Purview is that we know humans leak data, whether it's accidental or intentional, malicious or benign. And just to tell you that when I ask that question to customers, 9 out of 10 of them will answer no, and even the one will say, well, we're not sure. So at the end of the day, we don't have to trust humans to always do the right thing when it comes to leveraging some of the features in Microsoft Purview. In fact, Microsoft Purview is built on a foundation of AI and automation that was doing the AI and automation before it became cool in the last 6 months. We're hearing a lot about AI and automation. Well, Purview and Microsoft 365 have built a strong cloud service foundation off of those principles. And a lot of times that gives us the capability of implementing these easy buttons. And the great thing about this is we try to give you as many things out of the box as possible, starting with being able to classify your data. You know, the great thing about the data classification engine is this is the heart of, the center of the Microsoft Information Protection Platform, which so many things are based on, whether it's other features within Microsoft Purview, whether it's other elements within corresponding solutions like Microsoft Defender for Cloud Apps, or leveraging, you know, the capabilities to on-prem resources through the Information Protection Scanner and the unified labeling tool. All of these things are built on this Microsoft Information Protection data classification platform here. And the nice thing about Purview is Purview can help you look at essentially the state of your data estate. What tradable classifiers are being used, what sensitive information types are being used, if any. And of course, in most cases, you're going to see them, and how you're reacting to them. Are you applying sensitivity labels? Are you applying retention labels? How active is this occurring? What is going on? What are you seeing a large amount of files being created on removable media? How is your labeling? And is your labeling working? All of this stuff can be easily examined within the overview, or what I like to call the analytics page of your data classification blade. And at the same time, you can take advantage, as Richard mentioned earlier, as a compliance officer, as a global administrator, depending on you being assigned the proper role in Azure Active Directory, you can go into Content Explorer and get a good idea of what information is out there and where it is. And, you know, there's a bit of shock. There's a shock factor at first because, you know, a lot of customers don't realize what they have living in their Microsoft 365 estate, especially after they've been leveraging SharePoint and Office and Exchange Online for years. And so, like with Gladiator Industries here, I've noticed there's a lot of stuff going on, and there's a lot of information that will need to be, I will need to label and properly protect. And the great thing about the data classification engine is we have a lot of out-of-the-box classifiers and what we call SITs, or sensitive information types. So we make it very easy for security and compliance officers to, again, just do the basics. But let's, you know, this is all well and good, Steve, but what if I simply want to ensure that I want to be protected against violations, I want to be protected, and I want to be able to pass audits, and I want to actually be able to avoid seeing my name in the media or press related to some type of data breach or some type of mass data exfiltration event. And we take these easy buttons to the next level by associating templates and associating policies directly with regulatory compliance standards. Probably my most favorite that I like to talk about when I talk to customers who are either just got fined for failing an audit, just suffered a data breach, or are getting ready to go through another audit, or we have a new compliance officer that has just come on board and wants to, you know, evaluate and actually improve their compliance, evaluate Purview and improve their compliance posture. I like to move right into data loss prevention. And I like to talk about the data loss prevention policies. And the data loss prevention policies are wonderful because, you know, if you're coming from an existing DLP solution like Digital Guardian or Symantec, okay, those are fantastic as well, and those are very complex, and we give you the same kind of granular options here. But again, let's go back to the theme of what we're talking about here. We just want to ensure that we've got the basics covered, that I could be a health agency that needs to ensure that I'm going to be compliant with high trust and HIPAA standards, and I want to make sure that no medical or health related data gets leaked anywhere. I can then just simply go into the categories here. I can select medical and health and look for the specific policy, and here we have it, U.S. Health Insurance Act, HIPAA enhanced. And now the great thing about this is when I select this, I don't need to put in any type of sensitive information type because this template is going to do it for me. This template is going to automatically look for any information related to business, healthcare, employee insurance files, health and medical forms, PII identifiers, all medical terms and conditions, physical addresses. All of these things will be included as the sensitive information that would be protected with this particular policy. And as I go through, I can control the locations. The great thing about DLP is not just a Microsoft 365. If I need to extend this to the devices, especially because if you remember on the previous page, I noticed that there were 19,000 instances of files being copied to removable media, and I need to make sure that I have a policy that is either going to, at the very minimum, throw a policy tip or try to train the user in the moment if I'm using, you know, kind of the nudge encourage component of it, or I just want to mandate and block it just to protect myself. And again, avoid, you know, data leakage, data exfiltration, a data breach. All of these options are available. Now, in the short time that I have left, I want to go back and want to talk about what I find to be one of the ultimate easy buttons in Microsoft Purview. Now, at the end of the day, compliance is going to be something that involves regulation, conforming to a certain regulatory standard, depending on the type of organization. If I'm in the financial services industry, I might have to ensure that I meet PCI compliance and Sarbanes-Oxley compliance. If I live in the law enforcement or criminal justice space, I need to ensure that I am that I am conforming to the CJIS standards. I mentioned earlier HIPAA when it comes to health and life sciences. But then again, we have in the world of U.S. state and local governments, we not only have uniform bodies like CJIS or like IRS 1075 or HIPAA, but we also will have local regulations, state regulations as well that we might have to adhere to, and we might have to come under the purview of those audits, no pun intended. And right now, a lot of this stuff is still being done in Excel. Literally Excel, a spreadsheet that contains all of the regulation standards and controls, and then additional fields. And you have a project manager, and the audit occurs, and it's a long, tenuous process. And by the time one audit is complete, it's time now to go to the next audit. And in many cases, despite all the effort, we don't get the audit completed in time, and we're still subject to fines, to the point where on more than one occasion, I've had a customer tell me that they budget yearly anticipated fines that they know they're going to get for not meeting compliance audits on time. Now, I have nothing against Excel. I have nothing against Microsoft Project. I love those tools and I love those utilities. But what if I were to tell you that we can take those spreadsheets, take those Gantt charts, take all that stuff, and have a center management posture tool that we can then create assessments leveraging some of our premium assessment templates that can replace the spreadsheets, and in some cases even automate the assessments depending on the specific control. And we can then leverage this tool to be the center of all of our compliance audits and how we actually respond, including becoming the repository for all the evidence that we would need for those audits. And this is why I call the compliance manager assessments as the ultimate easy button in compliance posture management here, and for compliance audit management as well. Because when you are undergoing an audit like a CJIS audit or an IRS 1075 audit, this assessment is going to be a project. And what we do is we allow you to not only be able to manage a one audit, but multiple audits with a wide variety of templates applied, so you can actually turn Compliance Manager into the ultimate tool for your compliance officer and project managers for this audit as well. And the great thing about this assessment, these assessments are going to allow you to have a real-time posture management of the assessment and what is passed, what has failed, and by failure, the risk level of that failure, the testing status, and of course, all of the necessary improvement actions. And the great thing about this is this will allow you to decrease the time it takes to complete the audits, and at the same time provide all of the documentation readily for export that you need to actually provide to whatever auditing governing body that you would need to submit this to. And because you're leveraging Microsoft 365, there's a shared responsibility model, which means you not only get your improvement actions, but you also get the actions that Microsoft has completed and passed, and then also our subsequent documentation. So, and it's going to be right here. It's going to be exportable. You don't need to do any copy and paste into Excel. You can say goodbye to those Excel spreadsheets, as a matter of fact. And more importantly, it also, because this is within the confines of the Microsoft 365 compliance portal, it ties into all existing Microsoft 365 solutions. So you can get anything that involves something related to configuration or control in Microsoft 365, it can be automatically assessed. But anything that might be what we call paper compliance items, you can also go in and complete the improvement actions. And at the same time, as you are examining a specific improvement action, you can also go in. Come on, tenant. There we go. And assign actions as needed. For example, I might want to tell Archie that he needs to be responsible for this. And of course, Archie will get an email. And assuming that Archie has been given the appropriate permissions, Archie will be able to go in and actually supply testing updates and supporting evidence as needed for this particular compliance item here. So there's delegation. And again, one of the strengths of Purview is the fact that all of these tie into a single uniform information protection platform. So once you define those sensitive information types, you are actually able to leverage those in a variety of different solutions. But ultimately, at the end of the day, if you don't do the compliance basics, you're still going to run into problems. You know, policy tips are great for this. Phishing simulations are great. We do a lot of that here. And one of the reasons why we like policy tips and one of the reasons why we like phishing simulations is because, you know, in the moment training is the most effective. Correction through in the moment training is going to definitely take the most, is definitely going to be treated the most seriously, and it's definitely going to have a more positive effect on people's behavioral behavior, and it's most recommended for positive behavior modification, whether it's by giving you a quick notification through email, or it's you know, letting you know that you have personal data that's been used in 30 days. Do you want to trash it? Do you want to keep it? At the same time, you may notice that you might have set something in, and you also can let your users help you train our AI in the case that there was test data or a 16-digit number was inappropriately marked as a credit card number. Users have the capability of reporting it as false positive. And again, all this stuff is tied into ongoing training. We have to do this at Microsoft. Every fiscal year at Microsoft, we have to take our own internal standards of business, our own internal compliance. And a lot of times the stuff may be the same thing over and over and over again, but it's going to be necessary to keep users refreshed. And whenever possible, if you don't trust users to do the right things in certain scenarios, that's where the automation and AI of Microsoft Purview can definitely come in handy. All right.
Okay.
And just at time.
Yep. Good session today, guys. So great job, Steve. Great job, Richard, and thanks to the audience for attending. I know we've got like 1 minute left, but if there are any questions, feel free to post them in the Q&A window. And while we do that, just a little announcement. So our next session is going to be 2 weeks from today, May 25th. It's going to be complying with fulfilling Public Records Requests and Freedom of Information Act requests. So so we're going to be we're going to have a partner, MERP Systems. We're going to be co-presenting with BB. That's in 2 weeks. And great news! So we're dropping the need to register for these events. So so it's going to be, if you're part of the community, you'll automatically get the information. You'll get the invite, and you can attend without having to register. So we're trying to remove any friction so that you can attend with ease. And there are no questions in the chat window. So I thank you all again for joining today, and we'll see you in 2 weeks. Take care.